Greetings, colleagues. Two of the most common complaints in companies all around the world: emails that are a waste of time and poor email writing skills. Want to improve your business communication? Let me share with you what I have learned about email writing. I will teach you several strategies and tips that will help you easily write more effective emails. Welcome to the Rundown. Let's level up your business English skills. English email writing: how to easily write effective emails. Greetings, colleagues. Welcome to the Rundown. This is the 4 Business English Rundown, the show for people all over the world who want to improve their professional communication skills in English. Today we're going to focus on English email writing, how to easily write effective emails. There are 4 main areas that I want to talk about, so let's jump into it. The first one is register, or level of formality. So when you're writing an email, one of the first things you need to consider is how formal should you be? And I think you have to think about this kind of on 2 axes. The first, who are you and who are they? How do you relate to each other? Are you writing to your boss or your boss's boss's boss, something like that? Or maybe you are writing to your subordinate or your subordinate. Or you're writing to someone in another company, but you're writing to your counterpart's boss or your counterpart's subordinate. Think about in the hierarchy, who are you writing to? If you're in middle management or a lower management and you're writing the CEO or the president of the company, you're going to be much more formal than if you're writing to your secretary. So you want to consider who you are and who they are. But also you want to consider, what are you writing about? Maybe you're trying to get them to do something, or maybe you're responding to them wanting you to do something. If the CEO is asking you for a favor, it's quite different than if you're asking the CEO for a favor. Or maybe the other person, did you wrong. Maybe you should be a little angry or annoyed, or maybe you did them wrong. And you should be, reconciliatory. You should be apologizing and trying to make things right. So think about why you are emailing and how does that affect your formality as well. And a third factor to think about is your relationship with that person. Not just, the professional relationship, but is there a personal relationship? Maybe you're writing the CEO, but maybe you went to school together. Maybe you've known each other for 10, 20, 30 years. You're going to write to them a little bit differently than if it's a CEO you've never met. Maybe you're not going to write to them the same way as if you're writing a personal email to your friend that you've known for 20 or 30 emails, because they still are the CEO, but you might be a little bit less formal than if it's a CEO that you don't know that well. So take that into consideration. But also think about, do you want to have a personal relationship with them? I noticed this a lot when I was a lawyer. Sometimes, I tend to be a little bit more formal. But if you're too formal to a client or customer or colleague, it's almost like you're keeping them at arm's distance. You're pushing them away. And you probably don't want to be doing that either. I encourage you to be a little bit more formal. You don't want to be too formal. So it's a fine line that you want to think about. One thing to consider is, what do they call you? If they call you by your title and last name, then that's how you should probably address them. But if they call you by your first name, then you should probably call them by their first name. Depends on the circumstances, of course, but take that into consideration. How do they refer to you, and how do they treat you? Do they treat you more like a friend and business colleague, or do they treat you like a business associate? Just business. So take that into account. The last thing I want to say about formality is, an email is maybe not as formal as a written letter, but it's not a text message or something like that either. And it may be a record. Maybe you end up having a dispute, with whoever you're writing. Maybe this is going to form a contract, or maybe part of a contract. And so you want to be very clear in the email and take that into account, that maybe this is going to be forwarded. Maybe some people are going to see this email, shortly, right away, or maybe months from now. So a level of formality is probably going to make you look a little bit more professional. If you're too informal, too glib, too sarcastic, I tend to be sarcastic, that might cause you problems down the road. You might want to moderate those propensities can be a little bit more formal in an email, but depends on who you're writing, of course. The next thing I want to talk about is, why are you writing? What is the purpose of your email? So before you start writing, I would encourage you to think about this. Why are you writing this email? There's lots of reasons we might write an email. Maybe we're just providing information. Maybe we're just providing information because we were asked for it, or maybe we think, you know what, this might come back to us in the future. We just had a rough meeting with some coworkers or a client, customer, whatever. I want to let my boss know about it right away. So if something comes about it, at least I've told my boss. I've kind of made a record. I notified my boss. I let them know so they're not blindsided about it, that sort of thing. So maybe I'm just kind of putting things on the record. Or maybe I'm asking for a favor. Hey, can you do this for me? Or maybe it's not a favor, it's just a regular business request. Hey, we did this, now you have to do this. Let me know when it's done. Or maybe, hey, I should have asked you last week. I forgot about it. I know it normally takes you a week to do this. Can you put, my request to the top of the pile? So you're kind of asking for a favor, even though they're doing what they normally do in their work capacity, their professional capacity. You're asking for a bit of a favor. Hey, get this done quick, if at all possible. You want to think about those things when you're writing the email. What is your goal from sending this email? And when you're writing the email, you want to think about that goal. Is your writing supporting that goal? If you're encouraging your boss or your client, potential customer to say yes, hey, this is my proposal. I think we should do this, or I think you should buy this product, buy the service, whatever it is. Is it written in a way that supports that? That would get them, the boss or the customer or the potential client, saying, yeah, that's a great idea. Of course I'm going to say yes to this. This is great. Think about what you want from this email and then write the email accordingly. Make sure it supports your goal, whatever that goal is. And of course, you want to be honest. You don't want to hide things or anything like that. I'm not saying that. But when you're writing it, if you're trying to persuade them, then be persuasive. Let your writing be persuasive. If you're just informing them, that's fine too. Be informative. In a business email, there are some things that you always have to do. This is not an email to your mom or your brother, your sister, your best friend. This is a business email. Even if it is to those people, it's still in the business email context. So there are certain things that I think every business email should include. Now, of course, there may be some exceptions, so I'm not going to say they're not. But generally speaking, you should always have these things in every business email. One is a proper greeting. Dear John, dear Mr. Smith, dear Ms. Jones. If you want to be a little less formal, hi Ms. Jones, hi Nancy, something like that, okay. But I would still have that line of greeting there. An exception to that might be when you're replying back and forth, you have a series of emails going back and forth in a short amount of time, then it's okay to kind of skip that greeting. But normally, if you're writing especially if it's a new email to someone, you need that line of greeting. It's just the proper way to start the email. The first paragraph should explain why are you writing this email. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Are you writing to inform them, to provide information they requested? Are you asking them to make a decision? Are you asking them to talk to somebody else or asking for advice? What do you want from this email? It should be clear to you and it should be clear to the reader. Now, for more information about that, watch this video. I'll put it up here or here about writing that first paragraph. It is the most important paragraph of the email. So make sure that first paragraph is short and it explains what you want from this email. What do you want them to do? We also need a closing. The closing should have something like regards, best regards, sincerely, something like that, and your full name and your contact information. You don't want to send an email and then people not know, who are you? What is your name? Where do you work? How do I get a hold of you? So whatever your contact info is, you want to include usually in a signature block. I have the closing in my signature block so I don't have to type it each time and I don't have to think about it. I know there's always going to be a closing and there's always going to be my contact info, my full name in every email. That makes it a lot easier and very professional. Another thing that every email should be is brief. We like to use brevity. Keep it brief, keep it short. A common complaint for emails, they're way too long. And what happens if you send something that's too long? People don't read it, or they just kind of skip over it. And you think about it this way. There are some things that are important in the email to you, maybe some things that are important to the reader, and maybe some things that aren't important at all. Now, the more that you include in it, the less likely they're going to see the parts that are important to you. You want them to know about this. You want them to read this and answer this question. But if it's hidden in a sea of other words, they might not notice that. They might not notice what you're asking them to do. They might not notice that important detail that you're giving them. And so it just gets lost in the sauce. But if you use brevity, if you make a short email, people are much more likely to read it and understand what they are reading. Keep that in mind when you're writing the next email. The last paragraph. This is where you explain what you are asking, what next steps you want to make from after this email. I'll talk more about that in the next section, but that is definitely something that you should always include in an email. The last thing I want to talk about is the last paragraph, the final paragraph. In this paragraph, you want to explain what are you asking, or what next steps are we going to take after this email. This paragraph should be short, and it should be very clear. What are you asking them to do, or what are you going to do next, or what are you waiting for? You want to be realistic. Don't ask for too much. And I mean this both in quantity and quality. If you're asking them to do 5 or 10 different things, even if they're simple things, maybe you're not asking them to do a lot, but gee, I need you to go here, do this, call this, do 5 or 10 simple things. That's still a lot of things. Do you need them to do all of those things? Maybe you do, but maybe you can simplify it some way. Maybe by asking them to do 10 things, they're only going to do 3. Maybe they're just going to do 3. What happens when that happens? They're going to do the 3 that are probably easiest for them. I noticed this a lot when I would email, especially my boss. If I asked 5 questions, maybe she only answers 1. And it's often the one that's not most important to me. So how did I respond to that? I asked less questions. And the questions that I ask, I make sure are the important questions. And maybe I put in less important questions, that are kind of part of the discussion. But at the end of the email, I'll make clear what are my important question or questions. But you don't want to ask too many. And if you have a lot, maybe you need to send separate emails. So you have an email that deals with this question, and then a little bit later, you have another email with a different question, then a little bit later, another email with another question. If you send one big email, maybe you only get one answer. So keep that in mind. That's quantity, but also quality. Now, maybe you're asking for something that's big, like you're asking them to spend one day doing this. That's quite different than, just send an email and let me know if you're going to be there or not. Or just send an email, if this is interesting to you. That's quite different than, spend a day with me working on this project. That's a big ask. So take that into consideration. And also be clear. If you don't know what you want them to do or what the next step is, then how are they going to figure that out? So be very clear what you want them to do or what you're going to do, what the next step should be, whether it's by you, by them, by somebody else, but make it clear what happens next or what you want them to do. Make it crystal clear. And don't ask questions that you already know the answer to, or if you don't care about the answers. Now, some people do this. They ask a lot of questions or a lot of rhetorical questions. But in my experience, sometimes the reader, the recipient, answers those questions, but they don't answer the questions that you really need answered. So I try to minimize the number of questions that I ask. And I might go through it like, gee, that's an interesting question, but it doesn't change anything. I need an answer on this. These 2 questions are interesting, but it doesn't change what I'm going to do. This question or this answer, or the answer to this question, changes what I'm going to do. That's a question I need answered. These, not so much. So don't waste your time, don't waste their time with questions that don't really matter, don't change anything. So keep that in mind when asking questions. And I've also found it useful to set up a default. What do I mean by that? Something like this. You know, let me know whether you want A or B. If I don't hear from you by Monday, then I'll assume that you want A. So what does that do? It makes it clear, hey, the choice is up to you. Do you want A or do you want B? Should we hire, candidate A or candidate B? Should we form a contract with company A or company B? Do you want to meet on the 15th or the 17th? Whatever the 2 options or 5 options are, it doesn't really matter. Now, sometimes it doesn't matter to you what they choose. You just want a decision. You need a decision, you need to make that decision and move on. Maybe you do have a preference, but you need to make a decision. So maybe you say, you know what, I think that we should choose option A, but let me know what you think. If I don't hear from you by Monday, I'll go ahead with option A. Otherwise, let me know by Monday. Now, why is this advantageous? One, you're still giving them the choice. So if they're the boss or they're the client, they're the customer, the choice is theirs, but you're setting up kind of a deadline that, hey, you need to let me know before Monday, before whenever this deadline is. Otherwise, I'm going to assume the answer is this. And hey, I'm going to assume the answer that I like best. Maybe it's important to me, maybe it's minor to me, maybe I don't care at all. I just need an answer. I just need to know, are we going to meet on the 15th or the 17th? Either way is fine with me, but I don't want to wait until the 14th and realize, oh, we never scheduled that meeting. We never scheduled that conference. And now I've got to call them. Oh, now they're busy on the 15th and the 17th. So now we got to reset it. It's going to be another week or 2 weeks or a month. Whereas if we set it up so that there is a default answer, we don't have to worry about that. Okay, I didn't hear from them by Monday. We're going with option A. You're not making this decision behind their back or unilaterally. You've told them, and you should give them plenty of time. I don't mean late on Friday, say, hey, let me know by Monday, 8 a.m. Of course, that's not enough time, but you're giving them a few days, maybe you're giving them a week or a couple of weeks, then that's a different scenario. You're giving them plenty of time to respond. If they don't want option A, then, hey, they're going to speak up and say something. Otherwise, if they don't care, then okay, we'll go with option A. But it saves you from hunting them down, sending another email, and another email, kind of harassing them almost to get that answer. You've already kind of agreed or decided this is the default answer. The first paragraph of any email is the most important. It will determine whether the reader keeps reading the email or just stops reading and forgets about this email. To learn the right strategies and tips for writing that first email, watch this next video. But before you go, conquer that like button and make it ours. Work hard today and enjoy tomorrow.